I want you to close your eyes and picture a disabled person. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? For most people, it's someone in a wheelchair or someone using a cane or a walker. These are examples of physical disabilities, but what if I told you that 80% of disabilities are invisible? From the person standing in line behind you to me, the host of this podcast, disability doesn't always have a certain look. Today we're peeling back the curtain on invisible disabilities, chronic illnesses, and why looking fine isn't the same as being fine. Hello, and welcome to episode 11 of Minds That Think Differently. I'm your host Amanda, and today I will be talking about what invisible disabilities and chronic illnesses are and why they matter. I just want to note that I'm not a medical professional, and this podcast is for educational purposes only. If you have stories, questions, or if you would like to be on the podcast, please email connect@thinkdifferentpod.com. For full transcripts and more information, please visit my website, which will be linked in the episode description. And with that, let's get started. I want to start out by noting that this is a part 1 to my Invisible Disabilities series. Originally, this was going to be one episode, but there's so much content and there's so much to cover that this will be a 3-part series. In this episode, I will be covering everything from what invisible disabilities are to the spoon theory and medical gaslighting. This episode will be the foundations and the introduction to invisible disabilities, while part 2 will be dedicated to physical and chronic invisible disabilities, and part 3 will be dedicated to neurodevelopmental, neurological, sensory, and other invisible disabilities. Before we get into the main topic, I want to start out with the mailbox segment. Today's question is, how do I explain what I'm going through when people can't actually see it? This is such an important question because so many people with invisible disabilities, chronic illnesses, mental health struggles, or neurodivergence deal with this issue. Sometimes the hardest part isn't only the symptoms themselves. It's trying to explain them to people who expect disability to always be visible. You might be struggling deeply and still hear things like, "But you look fine," or "You seemed okay yesterday," or "Are you sure it's that serious?" And over time, having to explain yourself can be exhausting. The truth is that you do not owe everyone a full explanation in order for your experiences to be real. Sometimes self-advocacy means explaining your needs clearly, and sometimes it means protecting your energy and keeping explanations simple. You don't need the perfect words, you don't need visible proof, and you don't need other people to fully understand for your words to matter. Since this episode is Foundations of Invisible Disabilities, let's start out by defining what is an invisible disability. About 10% of Americans have an invisible disability. Invisible disabilities are conditions that significantly impair daily functioning but are not immediately apparent to others. Often invisible disabilities include chronic illness. Often invisible disabilities can include things like chronic illness. People with invisible disabilities often endure a lack of recognition or acknowledgement for their disability on top of the disability they already have. Not all disabilities are chronic illnesses. Chronic illnesses are long-term health conditions that significantly affect someone's life, whereas something like neurodivergence is not a chronic illness. I want to give some examples of invisible and chronic disabilities in daily life to help you understand these better and why they're so important to understand. I'll start out with some examples that you probably heard of. Asthma, cancer, diabetes, and epilepsy are all examples of invisible disabilities that you've probably heard of, but you haven't considered as an invisible disability before. But there's so many more. And remember that neurodivergence and mental health fall under invisible disabilities as well. If you're neurodivergent, you are disabled, and there's nothing wrong with being disabled. Accepting that disability is a natural part of human diversity is part of creating a more inclusive and understanding world. That starts with removing the stigma around the word disabled. Disabled isn't a bad word, and you don't need to shy around it with words like differently abled or other words. Accepting and destigmatizing disability begins with using the word disabled. I want to note that there's a difference between a hidden and an invisible disability. A hidden disability can be a disability that's hidden by things like clothing or can be masked in some way, whereas an invisible disability means that the disability is not apparent to others just by looking at the person. Some in the community also prefer the term non-apparent disability because invisible can sound like it's non-existent. Throughout this episode, I will be using a combination of these words. Some examples of invisible chronic illnesses that you have probably heard of are migraines, fibromyalgia, stroke, heart disease, and cancer, as well as Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's are all examples of invisible disabilities. These are things that you can't tell someone has just by looking at them. A chronic illness is a form of a non-apparent disability. I want to give some examples of visible disabilities so you can really understand the difference between visible and invisible disabilities. Cerebral palsy, wheelchair users, and amputees are all forms of visible disabilities. What I want you to understand, though, is just because someone doesn't look disabled doesn't mean they aren't disabled, and we shouldn't judge based on looks. If someone is using accessible parking spaces or the accessible bathrooms, assume that there is a reason they are using that space. For example, those with Crohn's disease often require fast access to a bathroom. Those with chronic pain or fatigue issues might use an accessible parking space for less walking time to entrances. A lot of the issue actually stems from the symbol. In a lot of places, the symbol for accessible spaces is the wheelchair, which makes people associate things like parking spaces as only for wheelchair users, when in reality, those with non-apparent disabilities can use them too. I also want to define a little bit of terminology so that you can understand it throughout this episode in case you've never heard these words before. Able-bodied just means someone who isn't disabled. Acute conditions are something that goes away, like a sprained ankle or a broken leg, whereas chronic conditions are long-term and don't have a cure, and chronic conditions are often what falls under invisible disabilities. Flare-ups are periods where your symptoms get worse, and remissions are periods where the symptoms get better. And remember that co-occurring means having two or more conditions at the same time. I just want to note that the visibility of a disability can change based on the day, and we can't just generalize all disabilities as visible or invisible. There's always gray area in disability. So on that note, I want to shift into that gray area. Disabilities that can change from being visible to invisible depending on the day. These are called dynamic disabilities, which are health conditions where the symptoms and abilities fluctuate over time, meaning individuals may be able to perform tasks one day, but not the next. A good example of this is something called ambulatory wheelchair users. An ambulatory wheelchair user is someone who can walk, move short distances, or use their legs in some form. Like they may be able to stand, but they might need their wheelchair for longer distances, or they can walk on some days and need a wheelchair on others. There are certain hidden disabilities that can cause someone to become an ambulatory wheelchair user, which are usually related to chronic pain like EDS, MS, or dysautonomia. For these people, a wheelchair provides independence and allows them to participate in activities where they otherwise couldn't. There are also part-time wheelchair users who have a condition that allows them to walk sometimes, but they might need a wheelchair at others. Full-time wheelchair users are those who are in their wheelchair for most of the day, and it's their main mode of transportation. There are a few misconceptions about ambulatory wheelchair users and wheelchair users in general. Not all wheelchair users are paralyzed, and ambulatory wheelchair users are a significant portion of the population who uses wheelchairs. If you see someone in a wheelchair get up and walk, that doesn't mean they're faking, and that also doesn't mean they don't need the wheelchair. These people often can't walk long distances, making the wheelchair necessary. Other common dynamic disabilities are MS, lupus, POTS, EDS, ME, and mental health conditions. Many people with dynamic disabilities use assistive technology or mobility aids, and I want to take a little bit of time to talk about assistive technology. Assistive technology are things like text-to-speech, jar openers, or any type of technology that somebody uses to make daily tasks easier. Mobility aids are things like walkers, wheelchairs, and canes that allow someone to get around easier. These things enhance independence, safety, and daily functioning for disabled individuals. Some people view being in a wheelchair as something bad when really it's not. A wheelchair is just a mobility aid that allows a wheelchair user to get around, explore, and experience things they wouldn't be able to do without it. Assistive technology and mobility aids enhance quality of life, independence, and happiness for disabled people. Next, I want to talk about common challenges people with invisible disabilities face. They often face a lack of education and understanding. Able-bodied people tend to be less empathetic than they would be towards someone with a visible disability. That bias is sometimes unintentional, but it does still happen. On top of already being disabled, those with invisible disabilities are often judged and asked questions. They often have to validate their struggles in a way they wouldn't have to do if they were visibly disabled. This societal disconnect of not treating invisible disabilities as real is the root of a lot of stigma and challenges that those with hidden disabilities face. There's also the burden of guilt. Constant judgment from others can make you internalize that it's your fault. Comments like, "you look fine to me," or "you're just lazy," or "I'm sure you're fine," invalidates real struggles. You may need to cancel plans due to things like flare-ups, and you might feel like you're letting people down. Next, I want to talk about the intersectionality of mental health, neurodivergence, and disability. So first, I want to start out with mental health. Mental health does fall under the category of invisible disabilities. While they might not look visibly sick or like they're struggling, people with mental health conditions experience similar struggles as those with physical disabilities. Mental health is also a dynamic disability, and it can be hard to explain to others why you seemed fine yesterday and why today seems more challenging. Mental health also has a huge impact on friends, family, school, and work. And mental health is so important to understand, especially as a teenager or young adult, because 1 in 3 high school students have experienced poor mental health in the last year. Mental health struggles can also have physical symptoms as well, such as depression creating tiredness, although the thing is, people with mental health conditions can mask their symptoms. Next, I want to talk about neurodivergence, and if you've listened to any of my past episodes, you will know that neurodivergence encompasses a wide range of experiences and that all conditions under the neurodivergent umbrella are considered hidden disabilities. To connect disability, chronic illnesses, and neurodivergence, they're commonly co-occurring together, such as autism and ADHD often have common co-occurring chronic illnesses like POTS, EDS, or MCAS. This is actually called the trifecta, and if you don't know what any of these conditions and abbreviations I'm talking about are, don't worry. They will all be covered in Part 2 and Part 3 of this series. Now, mental health and neurodivergence probably isn't what you thought about at the start of this episode when I told you to picture a disabled person, but these are still valid forms of disability. Mental health conditions, neurodivergence, and disability are commonly co-occurring. I want to preview something called the trifecta. This encompasses POTS, EDS, and MCAS. And these 3 conditions are commonly grouped together because it's very common to have all 3. About 80% of people with EDS also have dysautonomia like POTS. On top of that, these 3 invisible disabilities are commonly co-occurring with autism and ADHD. In Part 2, I will do a deep dive into the trifecta, and that will be a large focus of the episode, so stay tuned for that. Next, I want to talk about some common misconceptions around disability. "You don't look disabled" is something that a lot of people with invisible disabilities hear. The issue is that there's no way to look disabled. Disabled doesn't have a look, and just because someone doesn't look like what you think disabled looks like doesn't mean that they aren't disabled. Invisible disabilities are not made up or all in our heads. They are real and medically documented experiences, and believing that they are not real just because it's not something you can see leads to bias. Another myth is believing that they're just using their disability as an excuse or that they don't actually need support. Non-apparent disabilities can be just as debilitating as visible ones. I want you to think about it this way. Wearing glasses is a sign of a visible visual disability, where we understand that someone might have difficulty seeing things without them when they are not wearing glasses. But if they're wearing contact lenses instead, does that mean that they no longer have vision problems? No. It just means that they're using technology that allows their disability to become an invisible one. There's also a lot of decision fatigue when deciding whether to do something or not. While able-bodied people can just go somewhere, disabled people have to think about how far is the walk from the car? Will there be places to rest? Or if I do this, will I be unable to do something tomorrow? Disabled people often have to calculate the cost of every task, which leads to a lot of mental exhaustion. This is called the disability tax or the invisible labor of disability. Disabled people have to make sure the place is accessible. Wheelchair users have to make sure it's step-free or has ramps. People with chronic fatigue might have to make sure there are places to rest or accessible parking spaces. Neurodivergent people might have to check if there's quiet spaces or sensory-friendly hours. Those with epilepsy might have to check if there will be bright or flashing lights. And all of this is before you even leave the house. And these are all things able-bodied people don't have to do, but disabled people have to do. There's also something called the disabled tax. This includes the cost of medication, specialized diets, mobility aids, and assistive technology, as well as other things that you have to pay for. And this all adds up, especially when disabled people have to pay for most of these things out of pocket when non-disabled people wouldn't have to pay for any of them. One of the most frustrating challenges with disability is unsolicited advice. Disabled people don't always need your opinions. Telling someone, well, have you tried this, makes it seem like it could be this one great thing to cure a chronic condition, when there isn't. And that's something important to understand too, is that these conditions cannot be cured, and it's more about managing the condition in your day-to-day life. Suggesting these simple fixes can also be really dismissive of the reality that the person lives with. The person has also either likely tried many of the solutions, or they might not work for the person in the first place. It's important to note that not all accessible products are accessible to everyone, since everyone has different access needs. Unless you're close to the person or they ask for your advice, don't give unsolicited advice to disabled people. Next, I want to talk about the spoon theory. The spoon theory was created by blogger Christine Miserandino, who is living with lupus, to explain to others what it's like to live with limited energy. She used spoons to represent units of energy. Each task, big or small, costs spoons. For example, getting out of bed might cost 1 spoon, or taking a shower could cost 2. You only have a limited amount of spoons every day. That's why disabled people can't just push through when they run out of spoons. If you continue to push through when you're out of spoons, you may have even less spoons the next day or have worsened symptoms. This is called spoon lending. It's sort of like taking out a loan on the next day. You can have more energy now, but that means you'll have less tomorrow and you'll have to pay that energy back. Another way to think about it is like a battery. Remember the battery analogy from episode 6? This is similar. Able-bodied people start the day with a battery at 100%, while disabled people might start at 80%, and disabled people's batteries drain faster than able-bodied individuals, and when the battery runs out, there's no more left. Understanding the spoon theory can help you plan out your day and explain your needs to others. You can say, I don't have enough spoons left to do this today. Understanding how much spoons you have on an average day and how many spoons specific tasks take you can help prevent flare-ups. The spoon theory also translates to mental health. For example, people with depression will have less spoons than someone without depression. Not every day starts with the same number of spoons. Those who have dynamic disabilities might have different amounts of spoons depending on the day. When disabled people don't have enough spoons, they often have to decide what to use their spoons on. Before we continue, let's take a short sensory break. I've talked about a lot of stuff, So I just want you to look away from the screen and let your thoughts drift. Next, I want you to understand how many invisible disabilities there are. There are hundreds, and remember in parts 2 and 3, I'll go deeper into some of these, but I'm including this section because I want you to know that if you have any of these disabilities or chronic illnesses, I want you to know that I see you. And even if I don't cover your condition in part 2 or part 3, I still recognize your condition. I just don't have the time to cover every single condition. So just remember that even if I don't cover your disability, it's still valid, and you are still valid. Next, I want to talk about medical gaslighting and advocacy. Medical gaslighting is something I've talked about in previous episodes, but just to review, it's when medical professionals manipulate patients into questioning their own experiences. Medical gaslighting can sound like, "You're just stressed," or "Have you tried sleeping more?" or "Have you tried losing more weight?" or "Have you tried this or that?" It's another way of brushing it off or blaming your symptoms on something else. This is called psychologization, taking a physical problem and telling the patient it's a mental one. When you're neurodivergent, doctors are even quicker to do this. So many times I've experienced doctors telling me my experiences are all anxiety, and that's one of the most common responses people get. Medical gaslighting often occurs with women in minority communities. Women wait on average 10 years for an endometriosis diagnosis and are way more likely than men to have any physical pain they experience attributed to anxiety. And Black patients are 22% less likely to receive pain medication for the same symptoms as white patients, and the patient's concerns are often minimized or ignored. They're often attributed to anxiety or stress. Being told that's just anxiety is something that many people with invisible disabilities hear, especially from medical professionals, especially if you're searching for your condition. Medical gaslighting can be incredibly harmful because it can lead to people not getting the diagnosis or the treatment that they need, and not seeking out that diagnosis or treatment, as well as planting roots of self-doubt and internalized ableism. I want to talk about something called the normal test trap. You feel like your body is falling apart, but all your tests come back normal. A normal test result doesn't mean that your symptoms aren't real. It just means that that specific test didn't show the cause of your symptoms. After being told that your test result is fine so many times, you can start to wonder if you're actually making it up. I want to give you some scripts you can use with doctors. If a doctor tells you, "I don't think we need to run that test," you could say, "I understand that this is your opinion. However, since we are leaving my symptoms uninvestigated, I'd like you to document in my chart that I requested the specific test and you're refusing to order it." Doctors are required to document things if you ask them to. You could also bring a second person. Bring a parent, a friend, or an advocate if you're comfortable. Doctors are more likely to take you seriously if there's another person in the room. Bring the receipts, and if you don't have any, start recording things. Say, "On Tuesday, I had to sit down 4 times while brushing my teeth because my heart rate hit 130. If a doctor tells you it could be stress, ask them, "What else could it be?" or "What's our differential diagnosis?" If you say not just the symptoms, but also how it affects your life, they might take you more seriously. This might look like saying, "I'm not just here because I'm in pain. I'm here because this is affecting my ability to go to school, eat, shower, or whatever it's preventing you from doing." If you get a normal test result, say, "Since this test came back normal, but my symptoms are still significantly affecting my life, what's the next logical step in our investigation? And if you aren't sure, what specialist should I be seeing who handles whatever the system is you are struggling with?" I would recommend bringing notes to your doctor. This is something that I've started doing where I record my main concerns, symptoms, triggers, relief, and impact on my life. This has helped me get diagnosed with more things instead of my issues just being deflected. I want to close out with some advocacy and action steps. The first step of advocacy begins in your head. It's deciding that you aren't lazy or dramatic if you feel like you need a chair, a break, or a different way of doing things. You don't need a doctor's note to validate that feeling to yourself first. I want to talk about ally advocacy too. If you're non-disabled, one thing you can do is stop being a disability detective. You shouldn't be judging who uses a parking spot or judging someone based on whether you think they look disabled. Your advocacy can also look like taking the burden off us. If you're planning a group hangout, check if the venue has seating or stairs before you ask your disabled friend. Don't make them do the invisible labor. And most importantly, when someone tells you they are struggling, believe them the first time. Now I want to talk a bit about the symbol of invisible disability, and that symbol is the sunflower. It's a yellow sunflower with a green background, and the most common place you will find it is the sunflower lanyard, but there are also pins and stickers as well. The sunflower lanyard signifies to other people that you have an invisible disability, and it can tell people that you might need help or struggle with certain things. The sunflower lanyard is good for communicating to others that you may have additional needs. However, not everyone may know what the sunflower lanyard is, so I think we need to bring more awareness to it. But if you have any type of invisible disability, you're allowed to use a sunflower lanyard, but you could also choose not to. Wearing the sunflower lanyard is a form of self-advocacy that you can do. Some places hand out sunflower lanyards for free, like convention centers or museums, and you can look up places around you where you can get them for free. If you would like people to more clearly know what your needs are, there are also many pins and stickers that clearly communicate, I have an invisible disability, or I have this certain condition, or please be patient, or please offer me a seat. Using any of these are forms of self-advocacy that let others understand your needs. If you take one thing away from this episode, I want it to be that there's no one way to look disabled, and disability can come in many different forms, and you should be accepting, inclusive, and non-judgmental towards everyone, regardless of whether their disability is visible or not. Now I will do a short recap of everything I discussed in this episode. First, we talked about what invisible disability actually is, and we broke some myths and stereotypes around invisible disabilities. I also talked about dynamic disabilities, so we understand that disabilities can change based on the day. We also talked about common challenges that people with invisible disabilities face, the spoon theory and medical gaslighting, and the intersectionality between invisible disabilities, mental health, and neurodivergence. And finally, we ended with some self-advocacy and ally advocacy for those with and those supporting those with invisible disabilities. Then I will end with an affirmation. The affirmation for this episode is, my symptoms are real, my needs are valid, and I don't need to look sick to deserve rest and support. And the question for this episode is, if I stopped trying to prove how I feel today to other people, how would I treat my own mind and body differently? You can think about this on your own or email a response. I may feature it in a future episode. The next episode will be the second part of this series where I will dive into physical disabilities and chronic illnesses. If this episode resonated with you or taught you something new, please follow this podcast on your favorite platform and share this episode to someone who could benefit from it. Conversations like these challenge stereotypes and create more understanding. And if you live with an invisible disability, chronic illness, mental health condition, or any struggle that people can't always see, I want to remind you that your experience is real and your needs are valid. If you'd like to share a story, ask a question for a future mailbox segment, or suggest a topic, you can email connect@thinkdifferentpod.com. Thank you for listening to Minds That Think Differently, and I'll see you next time.